My name is David Berman. I was in the music business from 1969 until 2001, starting at a law firm and then working for Warner Brothers Records, Capitol Records, Geffen Records, and Buena Vista Music Group, which is the recording and publishing arm of the Walt Disney Company.
Today, I'm so thrilled and honored to be speaking with my good friend David Berman, a legendary music executive whose roster of artists spans several decades and ranks among the top-selling artists of all time. Get ready to go on a musical journey with David and me through psychedelic rock, classic rock, glam rock, hair metal, pop, and more. So without further ado, let's talk to our friend David Berman. Did you ever have designs on getting into the music industry when you were starting out? Like, how did it even happen?
I'm in law school. I know I don't ever want to be a litigator for a variety of reasons. It doesn't matter. I heard there's such a thing as entertainment law. I don't know anything about it, really. I interviewed a number of firms that had an entertainment department. I got a job at Mitchell, Silberberg, and Knupp, and I get put into the music department. Like I said, I had no idea there was a difference between motion picture, television, music. I got totally lucky. We represented artists, labels, managers, songwriters, producers. And the fact that we represented all of those, it's what gave me the background to be able to do what I did in later years. We represented the Doors, the Beach Boys, Hoyt Axton, Buffy St. Marie, the Temptations, plus producers, managers, A&M Records, Island Records, the whole gamut, anything involved in the music industry.
Who represented whom? Were you ever interacting with the bands themselves, or was it always their managers or producers?
I had some interaction with some of the artists, but mostly in terms of the making of the deal, it was with the manager and or the attorney. The one nice thing about the music business is agents never got a toehold in it. They scoffed at music initially as it being, third, fourth tier. And by the time they realized that there was a lot of money to be made, managers had already taken over and agents performed no function in making record deals. Well, it eliminated agents who have a bad reputation for a lot of reasons. Not that managers don't also, as do record executives, come to think of it.
Do you feel like there was a sense of who truly had the artist's interests in mind most, more than maybe other parts of the team,
That's an interesting question. In the perfect world, or the better world, the manager had the artist most in mind. Secondarily, depending on the label did. Many labels didn't. Some labels did. Warner's always did. As the attorney for an artist, yes, the attorney definitely had the artist's interest in mind.
What was it like working with the Doors?
Well, truth is, I was never really a big Doors fan, but early on, very early on at the law firm, I do remember a big meeting with all of the Doors, including Jim Morrison, and I do remember I never became a groupie, but I was impressed with the fact that here I am sitting with Jim Morrison. That was a bit of a thrill.
So just his impact on popular culture, I bet.
Yeah, I mean, given who he was, that was Jim Morrison. I mean, he was idolized or hated. I was impressed. Of the four of them, and Ray Manzarek was my favorite, but of the four of them, what Jim said went. I mean, he certainly was the most important member.
And now we are left with only Robbie Krieger and John Densmore, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And I don't think they speak to each other, do they?
No. It's a long story. No, they don't. Yeah. The fact of the matter is, there were a lot of efforts after Jim died for Doors music to be used in commercials. I think Cadillac or somebody, they had $1 million offer, which two of them wanted very much, Ray and Robbie. And Densmore said no. Yeah. So there was some bad blood there. Densmore isn't completely out of character. I mean, there was a time when it was considered taboo to use your music in commercials. Well, by the time the Beatles and the Stones did it, who cares? It's okay. My only recollection of the Beach Boys is one of the worst days that ever happened to me. There was a benefit concert, and there were a lot of artists involved, and Lou Adler, who was a client of the firm, and Ode Records, were going to put out the soundtrack from this charity concert. And the Beach Boys were in it. And there was this person who was working for the festival who kept telling me, oh, I've got the Beach Boys covered, I got the Beach Boys covered, it's not a problem. I said, okay, so I concentrated on clearing all the others. And about a week before the record was to come out, I got a call from Dennis Wilson. And he was very nice, and I had never met Dennis before, but he knew who I was, and I certainly knew who he was. And he said, oh, I'm sorry, but obviously, we can't do this. There's no way we're going to allow this to happen. So I go in and talk to my boss, and he tells me, okay, you have to go to... Lou Adler was producing Tapestry at the time at A&M Records. I go to the studio, I go to A&M, I wait for a break in the session. Lou comes out, I tell Lou, the Beach Boys say they won't do it. Now, the record's already been made, the cover's been made. And Lou looks at me, didn't say a word, turned around and went back in. Now, my boss, Abe Summer, eventually was able to clear it, and he got it. But that was definitely the worst day of my life as a lawyer.
But did you get to see Carole King in the studio?
No, I didn't go in the studio. Later on at Capitol, I signed Carole King. But no, I didn't go into the studio. I just waited for a break. In 1976, I became a partner at Mitchell Silberberg at the law firm and immediately left to become head of business affairs at Warner Brothers Records. Essentially, I made every deal. Distribution deals, artist deals, producers deals, joint venture deals.
And so who were the artists you worked with over there?
Oh my God. Prince, Fleetwood Mac, Rod Stewart, George Benson, Doobie Brothers, James Taylor, Devo, Madonna. The fact that at the law firm we represented every element of the music business was a great training ground for what I was able to do at Warner Brothers. Now, it's true, at Warner Brothers, we weren't representing artists, producers, managers. We were making deals with artists, producers, managers. But I understood their functions because I had represented so many of them at the law firm.
Can you talk about like A&R? Like, how did people find the acts to then sign to the label?
Well, essentially by going to gigs. Most new artists submitted themselves. They wanted to get signed, especially to a label like Warner Brothers. So it was partly discovering a new artist and partly responding to a request to sign an artist. The interesting thing about Warner Brothers was it was the most artist-friendly label I think that there has ever been. It had the best or the second best A&R department ever. Motown may have had a better A&R department when it had Norman Whitfield and Holland Dozier in Holland and Harvey Fuqua and Johnny Bristol, etc. But Motown was a very A&R-oriented company and not an artist-oriented company. Warner's was an artist-oriented company that happened to have one of the best A&R departments.
Could you expand on that? Like, what the difference?
Well, the A&R department at Warner's, as it was also with Motown in its heyday, was almost entirely of producers. I mean, you had Lenny Waronker and Ted Templeman, Russ Titleman and Gary Katz and Steve Barry. They were all great record producers, and I'm skipping a couple others. I mean, plus we had a Seymour Stein, Quincy Jones. It was just chock full of talent. And one of the reasons for, and I'll take a little bit of credit for this, one of the reasons for the success at Warner's was because the A&R department and the business affairs department worked in tandem. So I went to, as head of business affairs, every single A&R meeting. I didn't open my mouth. Well, sometimes I asked questions. I certainly never, ever gave an opinion. But by the time it came to make a deal, I sometimes knew more about that artist than the artist's attorney did.
What happened on the business side of things in terms of like the standing of a particular act within like the charts, let's say, or their ticket sales or their record sales? Like, how was that monitored, and did that affect the relationship with the label? How did you decide when to sort of, kind of pump more money into somebody, knowing that they're gonna take off like a rocket versus maybe it's not working?
Well, first of all, you never knew. You believed, but you never knew. It runs the gamut from, we had Gary Wright, and what was that big hit that Dreamweaver, thank you. So Dreamweaver sold multi-million albums. The follow-up album sold 250,000. So you never knew. The good thing, one of the good things about Warner Brothers was, in general, it stuck with artists. Prince could have had 5 albums that were stiff and we would have stuck with them. Now, and as a matter of fact, the first 2 albums weren't terribly successful. They were okay, and the 3rd album blew up. But Warner's had a reputation of sticking with talent. Mo Austin, the chairman of Warner's, frequently said, talent will out in the end. And he believed it, and the whole company believed it. Now, the Prince is a good example there, because Prince was highly sought after. He was an 18-year-old kid. He was a kid, I can say that. A&M wanted him, Columbia wanted him. And I'm sitting with Lenny Warnaker, head of A&R, and I said, well, so you believe he's going to make it? And Lenny says, the kid's a genius. He performs everything. He'll produce himself. So I said, well, why don't we make a 3-album firm deal? If you're that confident that the guy eventually will make it, which was unheard of at the time. Now it's not unheard of, but at the time, I don't remember anybody ever making, with a new artist, a 3-album firm deal. And because of that, we signed Prince. So it was the great combination of A&R and business affairs working together, which did not happen at other labels.
And with someone like Prince, did Paisley Park exist early on?
No, Paisley Park didn't exist until he was much more successful. Paisley Park as an enterprise was expensive, the whole studio operation in Minneapolis. So that wasn't until later in his career. Not that many artists had their own label. They might have all had production companies, but artists having their own label was not that common. The economics didn't change. I mean, if Fleetwood Mac wanted to name their company Penguin Tusk, we wouldn't care. The economics are the same. I mean, it wasn't important to us what a name was. It was important to what the deal was and that the artist was successful.
Okay, so it doesn't necessarily mean that it slices up the pie differently.
No, not at all. Now, if it sliced up the pie differently, then you have a whole big negotiation.
So that's sort of this lesson that everything is negotiable, basically. There's no formula because it just depends on what you bring to the table, who you are, what you can demand.
Yeah, like we had certain firm fast rules. You could never have a key man clause. You know, the artist, if a certain person left, Mo Austin, the chairman, that the artist could leave. Never had that. Until Geffen started, and Geffen had 3 key man clauses with Joni Mitchell and I forget who else.
Were there artists at Warner's that you formed close relationships with, or managers, or people that sort of you had a mentorship relationship with?
Yeah, there definitely were. Most artists I didn't have much of a relationship with because I was dealing with their attorney, their manager, whatever. But I actually had a good relationship with John Fogerty. At lunch once, I asked him a question you're never supposed to ask, which is, how did you get your name? Not John Fogerty, but Creedence Clearwater Revival. And he went on for like 10 minutes explaining how he came up with Creedence Clearwater Revival, at the end of which I didn't understand it a bit. That was completely over my head. It still is. I don't understand Creedence Clearwater Revival, other than loving their music.
Speaking of Creedence, so that's one of the most storied feuds around. Do you have insight into sort of how that developed?
John, when he left Creedence, continued. He had his own little recording studio. He continued for years and years, always recording. Not for release, but just to keep himself busy or for whatever. So when we finally signed John in sometime in the mid or early 80s, I don't remember, he had been gone from Creedence for, I don't know, 10, 20 years, something like that. All I know is that he and his brother hated each other. I can't say that. That's not fair. There was a divide between he and his brother. I can say that. And then, of course, and there was a divide between John and the owner of Fantasy Records. Because when we did release John Fogerty's Centerfield album, Fantasy sued John for copyright infringement. In other words, I think it was, I can't remember exactly what song it was.
Old Man Down the Road, I think.
Old Man Down the Road, thank you, that's right. Which, according to Fantasy, was infringing on one of John's earlier songs, which was owned by Fantasy. So he's accused of infringing himself. He won that lawsuit.
That was pretty, I feel like that was pretty seminal, that case, because he had to prove that he had a style of music and composition, and he had to show that it was his.
That's exactly correct, but that's not unusual for any artist or writer. I mean, you can think of many songwriters who have a style. Many artists, they have a style. It's significant to them. And in a way, yeah, they always infringe on themselves because they're always making similar music. So it's a terrible lawsuit.
Yeah. And then Saul Zaentz, right?
It was Saul Zaentz, yes.
Yeah, and so the infamous song, Zaentz Can't Dance.
Oh, John did not like Saul Zaentz, that's for sure. And Zaentz Can't Dance was indicative of that. I mean, a lot of artists did that. Prince and Warner Brothers had a huge falling out where Prince wrote "slave" on his forehead, and I never understood. I was gone by then, so.
Do you have insight into sort of what were the arguments on each side, right? So he had to sort of don the new symbol that he created, and did they own the name? Can you talk about that at all?
We didn't own the name. Prince owns his own name. We never owned. We may have owned music. We may have owned the records, but we didn't own a name. We may have had exclusive rights to an artist, but Prince could change his name to a symbol if he wanted. My only Prince story is I met him a number of times, and Prince was. I can't say he was shy, because when you see him on stage, you wouldn't think that. But he was very quiet. And I met him many times, and I said, "Hi, Prince, David Berman," because, he said, yeah. So finally, he's walking down the stairs at Warner's. I'm walking up the stairs, and I say, "Hi, Prince, David Berman." He says, I know.
Just as an observer, it seems like he did a lot to try to support and nurture up-and-comers.
Well, we signed them. I mean, we signed Time. We signed the girls.
Wendy and Lisa. Sheila E., was she?
Sheila E., yeah.
Did Apollonia have a deal?
Apollonia had a deal with Warner Brothers, yes.
Yeah, so he really promoted all of them.
Well, he did. I mean, now, whether he was doing that to encourage artists or whether he was doing that as a commercial endeavor, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Probably both.
This may be under your radar completely, but so when Prince wrote, Nothing Compares to You, Sinead O'Connor, Manic Monday, The Bangles, did that ever sort of come into play in any of the deals, or is that just sort of...
No, we did not own any of Prince's publishing. If we had owned his publishing, we would have been quite happy for him to, write songs for Sinead and whatever else. But no, that didn't impact us at all. I mean, if he was writing great songs for other artists that he should have recorded, that might have affected us. But Manic Monday and Nothing Compares to You were never going to be Prince records.
What went into developing your artists?
Why does an artist need a label?
Yeah.
Forget the music business today, which is completely different from what it was when I was there. But yes, an artist needed a label. They needed the benefit. Well, first of all, often they needed the money to record. In those days, you couldn't record a quality album in your garage for $10,000. In those days, you needed, the benefit of a big recording studio with a Neve board or whatever. But a label, most importantly, got you to radio. A&R was critical, but after A&R, it was the promotion department. It was the department that took that record and got it played on the radio. Because without it getting played on the radio, you had the Grateful Dead and other, touring non-radio success artists. But those were the exceptions. To have any kind of meaningful hit, you had to get airplay. And an individual, I don't care how smart they are, wasn't going to be able to get you airplay. You needed a promotion department. Now, in addition, at a number of labels, certainly Warner's, we had an artist development department, which was very instrumental in helping to create an image for that artist, and especially helping to create tours for that artist. Because in addition to radio, what you needed was touring. And if you were successful, if you were the Doobie Brothers, if you were Van Halen, you made a hell of a lot more money touring and merchandising than you ever did on selling records.
Okay, yeah, that was going to be my next question. So that is true, right? So it would promote the records, but it really also...
Well, touring supported the record, and the record supported the touring. Right. They would definitely go hand in hand. That's why when a new record came out, it was generally at the time of a new tour. In those days, record companies, many of them, did have a publishing affiliate. Warner Brothers had a publishing affiliate, but it was a completely separate part of the corporation. So there was not really any synergy between Warner Music, the publishing company, and Warner Records. But A&M, for example, had an affiliated publishing company which was totally combined with the record company. So if you were on A&M, if you were the Carpenters, Elmo Irving, which were the publishing companies of A&M, Elmo Irving owned your copyright. But Warner's, it wasn't like that. But what we didn't have a piece of was your merchandising, or generally your publishing or your touring. Later on, much later on, actually, after I left the business, that became a part where record companies commonly made 360 deals, which included we own the records, we own the publishing, we own the merchandising, we own the touring. Wow. Because starting in 2001,
Napster.
Record sales had plummeted to such an extent that we, as a record company in my day, were happy to see artists make a ton of money touring and merchandising. Good for you. Now, they made that because we broke hit records. The hit record resulted in the touring and the merchandising. But we were quite happy just to make our profit selling records. When record sales plummeted, starting in 2001, record companies said, well, wait a minute. Our hit records are what make you possible to have that great income touring and merchandising. We want a piece of it. So that created a difficult negotiation. I didn't live in that era, so I didn't have that problem. In 1987, early 87, I left Warner Brothers and went to Capitol, initially as the president of Capitol Industries and later as the president of Capitol Records. Well, it was interesting. I was very happy at Warner Brothers. I loved Warner Brothers and Mo and all the people there. I had just signed a new 5-year deal at Warner Brothers when I got the calls from Capitol and the offer. So I go to Mo. I said, Mo, look at Bhaskar Menon, who was the chairman of EMI worldwide, has asked me to become the president of Capitol. Look, I just signed a 5-year deal. If you say no, I'm perfectly happy. I don't have a problem. And I'm not sure Mo ever believed that. And eventually he said, yes, okay, you can go. Not eventually, immediately, he said yes. So the funny story here, which may or not get included, is I used to go to the budget meetings every year in New York. Steve Ross and all the people at this big desk. We had budget meetings, and they're usually quite amicable because we were very successful. And I remember one time, though, we had budgeted no record to sell more than 1 million. And Steve said, look, you've been selling 5 million every year. You've done 4 million here. You got 7 million here. You're not predicting any record to sell more than 1 million? And he said, we don't know, So anyway, but by and large, those meetings were fine. The year I left, I didn't go to the budget meeting because I had already accepted the gig at the Capitol, so it wasn't appropriate for me to go to that budget meeting in December. And Steve says to Mo, there's a whole table. There's like half a dozen people from Warner's and all the corporate guys there. And Steve says to Mo, we don't let artists out of their contract, do we? Mo says, no. So then why are we letting executives out of their contract? Whew. When I heard this story, oh my God, I felt terrible. Steve embarrassed Mo in front of all those people. Years and years and years later, I found out Mo talked to Steve before the meeting and told him to do that. so that Mo had the excuse never to let an executive out of his contract again.
You performed a service for them.
Yeah.
You allowed them to cow everyone
Yes,
else in
yes.
the boardroom for forever and ever. It's perfect.
Anyway, but capital. So in February, I believe February of 1987, I went to Capitol. And the long and the short of it is, I had spent 11 years at Warner Brothers. Capitol was a very different company, a very different vibe. Whereas I said Warner Brothers was that artist A&R oriented company. Capitol was a purely sales oriented company. It wasn't artist friendly. It did not have a great promotion staff. There were stories about cattle prods, and I won't get into that. But I tried to change the tenor. I tried to change the vibe of the company. And as I've said in some books, I completely failed. I utterly failed. The only person in that company who understood what I was trying to do was Tom Wally, who was then in the A&R department, who I made head of the A&R department, but who had come from Warner Brothers. Tom knew what I was trying to do. Nobody else got it.
The culture was too entrenched.
It was I've said this often, I guess it's more insulting than I mean. I said it was a beer drinking company. I guess that's not fair to beer drinkers. But I do remember we signed the Cocteau Twins. I was very proud to have that signing. I mean, they were a very prestigious artist. They didn't sell a lot, but it was prestige. And I was trying to duplicate what Warner's had done with Randy Newman and Ry Cooder. Randy and Ry never sold a lot of records, but they were quality artists that attracted others. And I thought maybe Cocteau Twins could do the same thing. So I remember we had a marketing meeting, and some of the people there were bitching and moaning and complaining that Elizabeth refused to sign posters. And I'm shaking my head and said, instead of bitching and moaning that Elizabeth won't sign posters, why aren't you proud of the fact that you have an artist with such great integrity that her art comes first? Nobody got what the hell I was saying.
So that was the difference.
Yeah, that was the difference. In my brief tenure at Capitol, while I was president, we signed the Beastie Boys, MC Hammer, Bonnie Raitt, Garth Brooks, and then other minor ones. So I thought that was pretty good for 2.5 years.
Not bad.
I'm often asked, of all the artists that I've met, who is the most impressive? I mean, maybe Prince is the most talented, probably was. But the most impressive, my answer is always George Harrison. I really got to know George fairly well. I was at his house in outside of London twice. And there's a lot of stories about George. But what impressed me the most, when we first signed George, we had a Warner Brothers meeting in Mexico, in Acapulco. And we're sitting around the pool, Mo, myself, George, and people were coming up asking George for his autograph. And it was kind of a pain in the ass. And he was the most natural, down-to-earth person. He was a Beatle. There's only 4 of them. There'll never be any more. But he was so natural and so unpretentious. Now, I did get to know Paul, not as well as George, but Paul was on Capitol when I took over Capitol. And yes, he had a new album coming out, which did much better than most of his prior albums, but still wasn't big. So we had Paul and Linda over at the house for dinner. Not to insult Paul, because his talent is absolutely enormous. It was and is. But the person who most impressed me that dinner was Linda. She again was so down to earth. My daughter was into horses, so was Linda. They talked, and she was just a wonderful, wonderful person. That's my Beatles story. I never met Ringo, and I only saw John very briefly once. Yeah. And when I saw John, what amazed me was, my God, his hair is so red. Now, maybe it had dyed by then. I don't know.
How about the Beastie Boys?
When I was at Capitol, the Beastie Boys became available. They were still signed to the Columbia offshoot. Simmons label.
Jam, right?
Pardon?
Was it Def Jam?
Def Jam, thank you. And there was a lawsuit, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, I was leery about signing the Beastie Boys. The fact is, I tried never to, even as president, make my own A&R judgments. I did make two, neither were successful. But on the Beastie Boys, yes, I had seen them open for Madonna at Universal, and I didn't get it, you know? But the A&R guy who was bringing them in, he said, this is the real thing, whatever. So, okay. So I met with them. There were three arrogant, nasty kids who were the smartest group of kids I ever saw. I mean, they blew me away. I mean, they weren't polite. They weren't, they weren't deferential, but I could see how smart they were. I said, I don't know. This is not a gimmick. They can pull this off. So they impressed me. And then the deal that I made with them, I guess it's common knowledge. They wanted $1 million an album. So I said, okay, we made a 3-album deal plus options. And I said, I'll give you $1.5 million up front and then $750 for albums 2 and 3. Because I knew that whatever they did, they were coming off of License to Ill, which had that, huge hit, Fight for Your Right to Party. We had to do something good with them. So I'd eat up most of the $1.5 million. And then $750 an album was definitely affordable. So I liked the deal. I liked them. We signed them. They do Paul's Boutique, which Robert Hilburn literally calls the Sgt. Pepper of rap, critically acclaimed. And it's perceived that it was a big stiff. Well, that's really not true. When I left, it had sold 850,000. Now, it's true a lot of those probably came back. But over time, of course, it was hugely successful. Now, because it was perceived to be a stiff, I got within the company, from the higher-ups, a reputation. What the hell is he doing? He's signing an old fart like Bonnie Raitt, and he's signing this stupid white rap group like the Beastie Boys. So I did get fired. Actually, I didn't get fired exactly. I had a meeting with Joe Smith, who was my immediate superior. And there were rumors going around, and I said, Joe, you and Fifield, the then chairman, Basker was out. I said, you have to publicly support me because the rumors are going all over, and either you have to support me or you have to fire me, because I wasn't going to quit. So Joe says, well, I can't do that, meaning support you. I said, okay, then I'm fired. And without him saying a word, I walked out, I called the VP meeting and said, I've just been fired. I didn't want anybody to have second thoughts. Because being fired, I got all the money that was due to me. I wasn't fired for cause, so I had a lot of money left on that contract, which they had to pay me. But I did get fired, and the next day, I know Joe had a meeting with an artist manager, and I know this for a fact. He says to them, can you believe how stupid Berman was? He signed the Beastie Boys. So it's the two signings that I'm most proud of being involved in are the Beastie Boys and the Sex Pistols. So I'm very happy that I signed the Beastie Boys.
And so it's really true, you're only as good as your last deal.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
Wow. So you could have,
that's true in any business.
Yeah. You do scores of successful projects, and then just one that goes sideways, which it didn't even, history, would show.
Yeah, well, when I left, Garth had been signed. He didn't have a record out yet. Hammer had sold like 10 million. Bonnie was just beginning to have success on that record. And the Beastie Boys were considered a flop.
There's the famous thing from William Goldman is that nobody
knows anything.
Right? So
nobody knows. I agree with that.
Wow. So you just have to keep trying. And is there a business model? So there was a time when like broadcast networks and the studios and production companies, it's like, financing. So you'd make 20 TV pilots or series. If one of them becomes Friends, it pays for all the flops 100 times over. Is it the same kind of thing?
That's exactly the record business. You sign 100 artists, and if 15 of them are successful, and they don't have to sell 10 million, the 10 million will cover all of them. But the percentage of artists that made it, I would guess, is around 15%.
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
Most artists don't make it.
Yeah. And so that 15% just subsidizes the whole machine.
Especially if there are some big sellers, especially if you have Garth Brooks and Bonnie Raitt and Beastie Boys and MC Hammer.
During that heyday when you were involved, a record gets sold at Sam Goody Records. Who gets how much from that $10 sale?
I don't remember the exact economics. By then it was more than $10. But let's pretend $10. That's good enough. The distributor, I'm trying to remember the economics. Let's say the distributor got $7. In the case of Warner's, we were our own distributor. But still, the distribution company, we at distribution, still maintained a piece of that. So let's say they got $7 and we got $6. And the artist probably got $1.20.
Plus the fee that they would have gotten from you, like you said, the $1 million to.
Oh no, but they didn't get the $1.20. That applied against their advance.
Right. Okay. Right.
And even without the advance, all recording costs were in advance. We paid the recording costs, but it was an advance against the artist's royalties. So if the artist is successful, the artist is paying for their own recording costs. Plus, in those days, independent promotion was important. Independent promotion was you have your own promotion department that you were paying for. But it was important for a variety of reasons, mostly payola, to hire an independent promotion company, which had contacts at various labels. You hired a bunch of them geographically. And the cost of independent promotion became really expensive. So most companies, including Warner's, including Capitol when I was there, we said half of the cost of independent promotion are recoupable. So in addition to the recording costs and the advance, half of independent promotion is recoupable. Then, starting with MTV, of course, videos became very popular. And we also said that half of the video costs are recoupable. So the artist is paying for his own recording costs. Of course, he's paying back the advance. He's paying for half of the he's paying for half of the independent promotion, half of the video, and 100% of the deficit tour costs. Because a new artist needs to tour, but it's expensive, so we put up the money for you to tour, but we recoup 100% of that. So I guess you could say, now, you could say the record company had a big advantage, but remember, we're doing that with just about every artist. And we're only successful with a small portion of those artists. So the small portion of the artists that are successful, it's true, they're paying a lot of money for all of those things. But the unsuccessful artists, well, they're not successful, they're not paying anything, and we're not getting anything. Yeah. So it balances out.
So it's all speculative. It's speculative on both parties.
Of
basically.
Course.
Yeah. I can't believe we got an hour into this, that's the first time you mentioned the Sex Pistols.
The reason I was proud to sign the Sex Pistols, they had been first signed by EMI, then thrown off there, and then A&M and thrown off there. They were revolutionary. I mean, they you can say they didn't have talent, but they were mesmerizing. If you see videos of Johnny Rotten, who, by the way, was the sweetest guy. We had a meeting once with Johnny and his mom. And she was this cute old little English lady, and nothing like you would think, So they were just revolutionary, and I was very proud to be involved in signing the Sex Pistols.
Wow. Was that Great Rock and Roll Swindle, or is it?
Yeah, that was the movie that was made, yeah.
Because that double album is like one of the most amazing.
Our album was Never Mind the Bollocks.
So it was their first.
Yes.
They're coming.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so after I'm blown out of Capitol, I got a call from Eddie Rosenblatt, who was the president of Geffen Records, telling me confidentially that Eric Eisner was leaving. Eric was, David's right-hand man, and he was the lawyer, so he was head of business affairs, but more exalted than that. And Eddie says, Eric is leaving Would you consider coming over to Geffen? Now, preface to the story is David and I hated each other. I never hated many people, but I hated David, and he hated me. And when I was president of Capitol, he sued me personally. Had to do with John Lennon album, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter what. We won the lawsuit. So I say to Eddie, well, you want me over there, and Jim Walker, the CFO, he wants me over there, but what about David? It's his company, And Eddie says, well, that's the problem. So he sets up a meeting for me to meet with David at his beach house in Malibu, which was spectacular then. He's since sold that. And I did something, this was in 1991. So how old was I? 48, something like that. I did something at 48 that I wouldn't have done at 28. I had a meeting with David, and I apologized for something I never did. I wanted the gig. So, okay, I get the gig. And I spent 7 years, and I loved it. And by the way, by those 7 years, David was one of the best bosses I ever had. I have to tell you this. When David left in 1995 and started DreamWorks, there was a big party for David, and we were all sorry to see him go. And all of the VPs got up and said something. So I'm going to repeat my speech. You can cut this out. And I said, I first met David in 1970, 25 years ago. And when I first met him, he really yelled at me. And then over the years, whether as an attorney or at Capitol, I frequently dealt, or at Warner's, I frequently dealt with David, and frequently he really yelled at me. Now, in 1991, I became, I was pleased to work for Geffen Records, and since then, he's never yelled at me. So while we're all sorry to see David go, and that's when I got the laugh, I'm afraid he's going to start yelling at me again.
Well, it sounds like he could sort of separate his personal feelings and dynamics with someone with how good of a job he thought they would do.
Oh, he was the most, he's a smart, he isn't intellectual the way Basker Menon was, but he's as smart as any record executive I've ever seen. He's conniving. You don't want to get on the wrong side of him. He's relentless. He rewrites history, but you got to admire the guy.
And he was a hustler, right?
Oh, absolutely. So at Geffen, we didn't have titles per se, so I'm in my contract that I'm a senior executive in charge of business affairs and administration. Essentially, I'm head of business affairs and whatever. And I'm trying to think of any we signed great artists. We had Counting Crows, we had Pat Metheny, we had Aerosmith. Yes, we had Nirvana, of course. Nirvana, Counting Crows, Aerosmith, Teenage Fan Club, what?
Guns N' Roses. Weezer.
Guns N' Roses, of course. Guns N' Roses, yes. Weezer, Tesla.
Well, let's say so you're there in
91 to 98.
Okay, so I think was it April of 94? Is that when Kurt Cobain kills himself?
It was during the Tom Wally golf tournament. I'm driving, and April sounds right. 94 sounds right. It was big. What happened? A lot of tears. We released after that the MTV Unplugged. I think Kurt's death, together between Pearl Jam and Nirvana, grunge, as they called it, had pretty much taken over. We go through disco and hard rock and blah, but at that moment in time it was grunge. So I think the combination of Kurt's death and Pearl Jam stopped touring was largely responsible for the death of grunge, which then created the pure pop revolution Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake and Christina Aguilera and on and on, that which was worlds apart from Nirvana or Pearl Jam. And interestingly enough, at Geffen at the time, we were so hot. And we were so unprepared for that pure pop sound. We were a rock and roll record company. Even Metheny we considered a rock and roll artist, which of course he wasn't. But we were completely unprepared for that pure pop thing. We had nothing like Britney Spears or Christina Aguilera or Backstreet Boys or anything like that. And our A&R department was incapable of finding and signing. First of all, they wouldn't have liked anything like that. John Kolodner and Tom Zutaut and Gary Gersh, they would never sign anything like that. So we tried to bring in some new people. One of the problems was if you had one of those pure pop artists, you paid more money on a video for hair and makeup and styling than we were willing to spend on a video period. You had to invest really a lot of money. And not only were we weren't incapable of doing it, we were unwilling to do it, and we didn't know how to do it. So we went into a nosedive then. Then I left, so it doesn't matter.
One thing you may want to mention is we were talking about signing artists that would attract other artists, is that Sonic Youth was sort of a...
Oh, well, but Sonic Youth was definitely the I call it the Randy Newman Rycooter syndrome. And certainly Sonic Youth was that. Sonic Youth was signed a year before I got there by Gary Gersh. But because Gary had signed Sonic Youth is exactly the reason we got Nirvana. I mean, that's the ultimate example of you sign not a great successful band, but one of great critical acclaim that other artists are attracted to. And it worked perfectly, and that's the only reason we got Nirvana.
And what about an album like Unplugged? So if they're playing Meat Puppet songs, they're playing David Bowie, how does that all work in terms of rights so that you can then publish this album? How does that work?
There are two distinct sources of income and copyrights. There's the ownership and the copyright in the physical master recording, and there's the ownership and the copyright in the musical composition. They're totally separate. Now, if you own both rights, if you're A&M and you sign the publishing as well as the records, fine. But at Geffen, we didn't do that. So it didn't matter to us who owned the publishing, whether it was Nirvana's own song or whether it was a Meat Puppet song, all the same to us. We're paying a mechanical royalty for the use of that song, and I don't care who we're paying it to.
Got it. Yeah.
The artists may care. They must rather record their own songs, but I don't care.
So did you sign Weezer?
Yes.
How did that? Because that sort of guitar-driven hard rock, but then also poppy.
Yeah, he was poppy. Yeah, he is. Weezer did. I think their second album was what was the name? Is Madame Butterfly or no? It was Pinkerton. Pinkerton. Yeah, that's the Madame Butterfly connection. So we get sued by Pinkerton for trademark infringement.
The security company from 1890, whatever.
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
So they were seeking an injunction to join the album. So we go down there and we beat the TRO, but they're still ongoing with the injunction effort. And what they didn't understand was that Rivers Cuomo, well, he's a Harvard grad. He went to Harvard. He wasn't a Harvard grad then. He was going to Harvard. He was an opera fan, and he loved Madame Butterfly. And there's the Pinkerton in Madame Butterfly. So in naming it, it had nothing to do with the agency. It had everything to do with the opera. And that's where Rivers was coming from. So I don't know. We finally won it. Oh, before we win it, I have a meeting with Rivers. And I say, look, I think we're going to win this, but if we don't, would you change the name? Doesn't answer me. He just doesn't answer. I said, Rivers, I don't think it's going to come to this, but obviously if they do win, we'll have to change the name. Is that okay? doesn't answer me. Just doesn't answer me. Finally, I don't know how many times I go through this, and I realize, oh, that's his answer. He's not changing the name. Weezer's manager was Pat Magnarella, who's really a wonderful person. And he had managed a lot of things. He was in partnership with Bob Cavallo, and they had Earth, Wind, and Fire, and a bunch of other things. Anyway, goes back to the Love and Spoonful. And I once asked Pat, I said, who's the most difficult artist you ever represented? And without thinking, without hesitating a second, he said, Rivers Cuomo, by far. Beck was a signing frenzy. Two A&R guys at Geffen both took credit for it. But I never met Beck. It was a classic signing. I mean, I think Beck is up there with Sonic Youth. But Beck was successful. Beck was more than just an attractive artist. Beck was a successful artist. So I don't think he necessarily fits in that category. So in 1998, I'm approached by Bob Cavallo, who I had known for years and years. He was a manager, who was just about to become the chairman of the Buena Vista Music Group at Disney. And he asked me, would I like to come with him to be president? By 98, Geffen Records was tailing off. And we were in the process of being bought by, we had been bought by Bronfman. That's right. And we were in the process of merging a lot of things. So a lot of people were going to be let go. I'm quite certain I would not have been let go, but in any event, it seemed like a great opportunity. So I go with Cavallo to become the president of Buena Vista Music Group. I thought it was really exciting. There's all this money, Disney money, we can do anything. But two things I realized, unfortunately, quickly is one is the people that then ran it, especially the people who ran strategic planning, which was a major, important department then, which Bob Iger, I have to give him credit for. When he took over, he let them go. But they frustrated us. They were so careful about the Disney image. Even Eisner was offended that we had a band called Suicidal Tendencies. And we had a soundtrack that we were releasing, which had a Jimi Hendrix version of Killer Joe. Oh, they were appalled by that, you know. Thank God we didn't have Eric Clapton's Cocaine, you know. So it was just ridiculous. I said, why are you being in the music business? Why are you in the record business? If that offends you. So no, they weren't willing to drop the music business. But the then head of strategic planning admitted to me once, he said, I wish we were never in the record business. So what first hit me was, when it really hit me was, there was a publishing, we had Disney Music, a successful publishing company. Every Disney animated film, Disney owned 100% of the copyright, whether it was Phil Collins or Elton John or whatever. They paid a lot of money, but on every animated film, Disney owned 100% of the copyright. So even that stuff was quite big.
Alan Menken,
Yes, wow. Yes, 100% of the copyright. And they had other songs. They had a UB40 song. I don't remember how or why, but whatever. So, but I wanted to grow the publishing company. So there was a publishing company called Windswept, which a good friend of mine was running. And they were willing to sell. It was mostly Japanese owned, and they were willing to sell it. And I was in the bidding for it. So the problem was if Warner Music or EMI bought the company, they would just fold it right into their existing operation with no additional overhead. What I would have done was I would have folded Disney Music into Windswept and taken over Windswept. Yeah, we would have had more overhead, but we would have had a major publishing company, which is the only way to get a major publishing company, because if you tried to grow it by signing writers and stuff, that was a long shot. That wasn't going to happen. So I had to go to strategic planning. I said, well, I would like to buy them. And they said, but no, those companies will have no additional overhead. We will. I said, But that thinking will preclude you from ever buying a publishing company and ever getting to a big size. Didn't matter. So they poo-pooed that agreement. And then when I realized this is going nowhere, and I have to say, in the years I was there, we had no hits. Wow. We had a hit with Fastball, but that had been signed before we got there. We signed Big Kenny, who then became Big and Rich, but I think we did 2 albums with Big Kenny, and I don't think we released either one of them. Oh, wow. So I don't have much to say about Disney. What I love, and it applies, I guess, to any creative endeavor, but what I really loved about it, and what immodestly I'll say I was really good at, I love the tension between art and commerce. And I was really good at balancing those, which is the only reason I think I was successful at what I did. Because if you're all art and no commerce, you may create great things, but you'll never have any wealth, and you won't be known by many people. And if you have all commerce and no art, you have nothing to sell. So you've got to have a combination of both. And what hit me, a number of times in my job, I remember when signing the Cocteau Twins, also in signing Carole King. I loved Carole. We signed her, and she made it clear. Interesting, we signed Carole King and Bonnie Raitt just about at the same time. And Carole made it clear when we were signing her, she hated to tour. Bonnie was constantly touring. I said, Carole, that's okay. We still want to sign you, but you have to know it's going to impact your success. It's going to have a major effect on your comparative success. I'm not saying you have to tour. We'll sign you, but don't expect to, sell millions of albums, So we sign her. She makes a wonderful album. And meanwhile, now Bonnie starts climbing up the charts. Bonnie's touring like crazy. And Carole calls me and says, I'd like to tour. Well, it was a little late in the history of the album. She did tour, and she was wonderful. But again, with the Cocteau Twins, I was happy to sign them, but at a lower price. I knew what they wouldn't do. They were great artists. Elizabeth is a great artist. And I didn't care. I wanted to sign them, but I'm not going to pay $1 million for the Cocteau Twins. I'll pay $1 million for Bonnie Raitt, not at the time, but what an artist is willing to do doesn't define whether or not we would sign them, but it does impact what the deal will be.
The separated rights, so like publishing rights, right? So if someone, you had someone in the 70s or the 80s, and then now it's in the 90s, there's a movie that's sort of a period piece that goes back to an earlier time, and they want to use that song in the movie, then that all has to be negotiated.
Well, sure, but that's a simple negotiation. From the recording side, it's a master use license, and they pay you a fee. You negotiate the fee. From a publishing side, it's the same thing, but it's called the synchronization license. But it is 2 separate negotiations, unless you own both the record rights and the music publishing rights. It's not a complex negotiation, unless it's like early Rolling Stones, where what's his face? I'll come up with it.
Was it Alan?
Alan Klein. Yeah. Where Alan Klein would not allow any Rolling Stones music to be synchronized or to be master use licensed in a movie. And I'm trying to remember the negotiation with Sympathy for the Devil in the Anne Rice vampire movie, which Geffen Films was doing. Because I think he got it. I think it's the only time one of those Rolling Stones songs was ever included in a movie. I could be wrong about that.
Wow, that's Interview with Vampire, right? I mean, I can't imagine when Iron Man came out and they wanted to use Black Sabbath. I mean, if that doesn't happen, it seemed like it was so crucial to that movie. I mean, you could also have the movie and not have the song at all, but the fact that they were able to get the song just seems so.
You're pretty much John Densmore aside. pretty much you're able to get anything you want. Depends how much you're willing to pay.
Yeah. That makes sense.
I mean, the James Bond movies. Now, I don't know how much they paid for Shirley Bassey in the early days, but think of who they've gotten. Adele.
Paul McCartney and Wings.
Yeah,
Billie Eilish just did the last one.
Right. So you're paying a lot of money for that.
Yeah.
But then again, you've got a tradition going of having a major song.
Right. That's kind of like you've made it if you're asked to do the Bond theme.
Well, you're made it, but also it means that you're going to get a hell of a lot of money.
So it seems like we're hearing recently, people like Paul Simon, Bob Dylan, and others are selling their entire catalog for $400 million. What's going on there?
I don't know. Personally, I think it's a mistake, but I could be dead wrong. Yes, they're getting huge multiples. And I suppose if you're Dylan or Simon, if you're of that age, the fact that your songs over time will continue to generate money, well, you're not going to be around over time, So you get hundreds of millions of dollars, and now you've secured your family's wealth. But if you're Dylan or Paul Simon, they're pretty damn secure anyway, I somehow, I wouldn't say it offends me, but I grew up at a time in a belief that you never sold your copyrights, that that was your annuity. That was what kept you alive. Come hell or high water, your record sales may plummet, whatever. But if you owned your publishing and you would hit songs, you would always have some steady income.
It's your pension.
Yeah, exactly. Well, if you're Paul Simon or Dylan, I guess you don't need a pension. And I guess it's nice to get. I don't know. What do you do with hundreds of millions if you already have hundreds of millions? Whatever.
David Berman, thank you so very much.
You're very welcome. My pleasure.
Well, that was my discussion with legendary music exec David Berman. Thank you so much for joining us on Strange Device, and we'll see you next time.